Hi everyone. This is the first module where we will be discussing the Woodcock-Johnson 4 tests of achievement. The purpose today is to provide an overall overview or a quick review of the test, who it's for, what it's supposed to measure. The second module, module 2B, just has some quick suggestions for when you're scoring the test and a couple of informative bits about the administration. Before we go any further, however, I would like to introduce you to a special guest today, and that guest is Vampirina, and yes, this will be relevant at some point. All right, so very quickly, the WJ4 Achieve is obviously a test of achievement. It measures a variety of skills in the core academic areas of reading, mathematics, and written languages. This includes basic skills, fluency, and application. Basic skills are going to be those core skills, the foundational skills. Fluency is going to be the accuracy and speed at which students can perform those basic skills. And then application is going to be the more advanced skills. So for reading, it's going to be reading comprehension. For mathematics, it's going to be math reasoning, think of word problems, that sort of thing. And then for writing, it's going to be written expression, which is your ability to communicate effectively via writing. The WJ Achieve also has some academic knowledge tests that cover areas such as science, social studies, and humanities. For the purpose of this course, you will not have to do any of those academic knowledge subtests, and I honestly don't know if anybody actually uses those ever. I don't think they're very helpful, but they're in there. What the test does not measure, it does not measure oral language areas such as oral expression and listening comprehension. The previous version of this test, which was the WJ3 test of achievement, actually did measure reading, writing, math, as well as oral language. But with this fourth version, they actually took out the oral language tests and put them into a whole separate test called the WJ4 test of oral language, and I will review that in a few weeks. But just understand that if you're expecting to do a very comprehensive evaluation, that does include language tests such as oral expression and listening comprehension. So in addition to doing the WJ4 Achieve, you might also have to do the WJ4 OL or the WJ4 oral language. Okay, so you just know that if you're doing the WJ as your core set of batteries, you might have to have 3 test kits with you: the WJ Cog, the WJ Achieve, and then the WJ oral language. This is considered a fairly recent test. It was published in 2014. So yes, that is, 5.5, 6 years at this point, but still considered fairly recent test. The age range is for children from 2 years up to 90 plus years, and that is based on the standardization sample that was used to norm this test. The grade range is for preschool all the way to college and above average adults. So when you score the WJ Achieve and you test adults, it does have those norms for you. Although to be fair about it or honest about it, you're typically going to be testing children in K through 12, maybe a little bit of college students with this. There aren't very many reasons that you would be testing an older person as far as the standardization range. In this case, as with the Wyatt test administration, is based on grade level, not on age. The WJ4 Achieve is administered individually. The typical time for each subtest is 5 to 10 minutes. Some are shorter, some can take as long as 15 to 20 minutes. Those are untimed tests. Things like writing sentences, things like math calculations, where, depending on the achievement level of the child, they can go very high. User qualifications are similar as they are for any other test, and you all, as graduate students, have the appropriate training for this. Hi everybody, this is Owen. He's super cute, but try to ignore him. Alright, so now on to a brief description of the test. The test includes a standard battery, and as you'll see, that's one of the easels or one of the books that has 11 subtests in it. There are 3 alternate and parallel forms, so forms A, B, and C. In the PAC lab at UTSA, we only have form A, but you might use forms A, B, and C if you ever want to retest a student or just want to have a parallel form of it. The 11 tests from the standard battery yield 15 different cluster scores, which is a lot. And please note that tests 1 through 6 are considered core tests and are required for calculating many of the cluster scores that you can get. So you should always at least administer tests 1 through 6. They give you, in that 1 through 6 tests, 2 tests for reading, 2 for math, and 2 for writing. There is a second book or easel, as you'll see. That one is the extended battery. That one includes 9 subtests. There is no alternate or parallel form, and if you do the extended battery, in addition to the standard battery, you can get an additional 7 cluster scores. Here are the reading tests and reading clusters. On the left column there are all of the specific subtests related to reading, and then on the right column, the heading is cut off, but those are all the cluster scores that you can get for reading. So the lines between them indicate coming from on the right side the cluster, to the left the specific subtests. The ones that are connected indicate the specific subtests that you would need to administer in order to get that cluster. So for example, if you want the very first cluster, which is just called reading, you would have to administer letter word identification and passage comprehension, and then you can see how the other subtests contribute to the other clusters. You'll also notice a fairly high degree of overlap. By that I mean there are specific subtests that contribute to multiple clusters, sometimes as many as 3 different clusters. And these are the actual reading clusters. The reading cluster overall gives you a measure of reading, decoding, or sort of basic reading skills, as well as reading comprehension, which is a child's ability to take meaning from reading. Broad reading does the same thing, but it adds a reading speeding test. Basic reading skills look specifically at phonics and cite vocabulary and basic decoding skills. And then we have D, and there's actually a couple of clusters in there, reading comprehension and reading comprehension extended. These measure things like vocabulary and comprehension and reasoning with reading. Reading fluency and reading rate are similar. They both have to do with automaticity, a little bit with prosody, but not so much, but also with accuracy. So how quickly and how accurately can a student read? Next on this slide, we have in the middle there, those are the subtests that are related to reading from the WJ Achieve. You see at the top, just so you know what column I'm talking about, reading recall, and at the bottom of that column is word attack. And they're arranged from top to bottom based on level of complexity. And then on the left-hand side of the screen there is going to be the type of reading skill that is being measured. So if we go down to the very bottom, our least complex reading tasks are word attack and letter word identification. and together they measure the child's sound letter knowledge, phonetic coding, which we talked about last week in the first module, as well as reading, decoding, reading isolated words. And then as you move up, we get more into fluency types of tasks, automaticity, a bit of comprehension, and then at the very top, we get into passage comprehension and memory for things that are being read. I think this is a really important image here, just because it shows, starting from top to bottom, how you can use the different types of subtests to kind of figure out a student's reading ability. And the way I would use it is sort of starting from bottom to top here. Are there any areas or clusters of areas that a student appears to be doing fine in, and then they sort of transition to maybe more complex skills and they're not doing as well in, and maybe that can represent an area for intervention. Next, we have the mathematics tests and clusters. This is just like reading. So we see here on the left, there are 4 tests of math that contribute to 4 different clusters. Mathematics cluster is an overall cluster of problem solving and math computation. Problem solving, a lot of times, is sort of mixed in with reasoning to a certain extent, and that is going to be a child's ability to figure out what they have to do in that particular problem. And then computational skills are the very basic math skills. So just think about, if you're given a very straightforward mathematics handouts just with a bunch of numbers, and you have to do different computations and calculations, that's what that is. Broad mathematics adds automaticity to the mix of mathematics. And then at the bottom, C and D, you sort of have the skills that I've talked about, but they get broken down into their own composites. So the math calculation skill composites just focuses on the more basic computational and calculation skills. And then finally, math problem solving focuses on overall mathematical knowledge and reasoning and applied problem solving. And here we see the same sort of setup as we did with reading. Down at the bottom, we have calculation and math facts fluency, which are considered less complex tasks. And then towards the top, you have more reasoning and application and more measurement of mathematical content and mathematical knowledge. And actually, we'll talk about a little bit more about mathematics in a couple of weeks. Finally, we have the writing tests and writing clusters. We see there are 4 tests for writing, which contribute to 4 different clusters here on the right. The written language cluster, again, is sort of an overall cluster that looks at basic skills like spelling, as well as application skills such as quality of expression. Quality of expression basically means how well can you communicate effectively in writing. Broad written language measures the same area but adds in a fluency component, so how quickly can you complete writing tasks. And then at the bottom, C and D, kind of paralleling how the WJ Achieve does math, you get clusters that are broken down first into basic writing skills. If you want to think about the Wyatt, this would be things like the mechanics and a little bit of the grammar skills, spelling, punctuation, word usage, that sort of stuff. Then at the very bottom, we have written expression. Again, how well can you communicate via writing, and also how quickly can you get it done. If you want to think about the Wyatt, this is going to be very similar to the essay, where we're looking more of those thematic abilities and ability to communicate ideas well in writing. And then here we have, again, what I think is a very helpful graph here that shows towards the bottom basic skills such as spelling, in the middle some fluency, and then at the very top actually writing for meaning writing to communicate effectively. Here I have put together a slide that shows on the left column, and it's this slide and the next one, the areas of achievement that are identified as specific learning disabilities in IDEA. In the middle are the WJ Achieve clusters that parallel them or that are measuring the same area. And then on the right, I know it's cut off by my face, but those are the individual subtests. So the way that this table can be helpful is, let's say you had to do math calculation testing. That's what you're really concerned about. Well, you know that you can give, if we're looking at the clusters, mathematics and the calculation clusters, and you can also give the calculation and the math facts fluency cluster or individual tests, which can tell you about the child's math calculation ability. This next slide is the same thing. At the bottom there we have basic reading skills and written expression. At the top though, highlighted in red, yes, oral expression and listening comprehension are considered areas of specific learning disability by IDEA, but as I've already mentioned, the WJ Achieve does not have tests that measure for these things, so instead you would have to do something like the WJ tests of oral language, or you can do something like the WIAT or the KTEA, which do have oral language subtests in them. These next couple of slides include clusters that you can get by combining or mixing tests from reading, writing, and math, so kind of blending them together, and that's why it says cross-domain clusters, because we're sort of mixing these things. The first clusters that you can get are brief achievement and broad achievement, and this basically puts everything into a blender and gives you an overall score of a child achievement ability. I don't really like this score. It can tell you just generally if a child is having difficulty or not, but it's not helpful in that it doesn't specify, is it a math problem, is it a reading problem? So yeah, I would mostly stay away from it. B here, you see that I've crossed out. I really don't like this cluster at all. What it does, it tries to combine basic skills in reading, math, and writing and tell you how's a child doing with their basic skills across domains. Honestly, I don't see a point to this particular cluster. It's not very helpful. Why don't we just look at reading, math, and writing individually instead? One thing that cross-domain cluster that I do think is helpful is academic fluency, particularly if you're working with children and one of the referral concerns is that it takes them a long time to do something, then this can help you figure out if you're seeing that in the testing, okay? Because it's a fluency measure, it's how quickly can they do stuff, so I do like that particular cross-domain cluster. Over here you see that I don't like academic applications or academic knowledge. Again, it's just, you know, you're mixing things, and when you do, it's not very helpful anymore. It's helpful to just separate them out. So I'm just going to ignore those. But I do want to highlight that the final cross-domain cluster that you can get is called phoneme graphing knowledge. That one's really good, especially for children that have concerns about basic reading skills, maybe dyslexia, which you'll learn more about during practicum next year. That is something that can help you figure out if there are any difficulties there. So that is one that I do think is a good one, but I would ignore the other two. That's it for this module.